So it appears that Tahir Ali might be getting closer to getting what he wants with regard to blasphemy laws. In this case, blasphemy laws by the back door, if you like. Because you've probably heard or seen all over social media the case about the man being charged with an aggravated public order offence for burning the Quran in public. So whilst I can't comment specifically about that case because it's a live case for obvious reasons, I can talk about the law generally and one or two of the documents that have popped up. Again, without drawing conclusions about that case and without saying it is or is not a crime, etc., for obvious reasons. But I can also give you a broad caveat that I don't approve of burning religious books and in public, and I don't approve of intentionally causing people alarm and distress. Not to say that that has done that. That's for the courts to decide in due course. But that's also not to say that I won't fight for somebody's right to the freedom of expression, and that may include words or demonstrations and protests. Now, you may also liken this to protests you've seen up and down the country doing all sorts of different things, calling out all sorts of different slogans and phrases and demonstrations and so on. Many of you may argue they are no different. Many of you may argue it's completely different and that this is wrong. But again, whether it amounts to a crime or not is another matter and for the courts to decide. Now, you might remember about 5 months or so ago, I did a video about this issue where Tahir Ali brought this up in Parliament. And whilst he didn't call it blasphemy laws, it was essentially calling and requesting Parliament to consider a blasphemy law of sorts by officially condemning all forms of desecration. I did a long video talking about why that would be wrong, generally speaking, because it would amount to a blasphemy law. So whilst I give you a small snippet of what he said there, and then I'll tell you my broad response to that. While you're watching this, please do like this video and subscribe to the channel. It'll give you time to do that. Let's just remind ourselves of what he said.
November marks Islamophobia Awareness Month. Last year, the United Nations Human Rights Council adopted a resolution condemning the desecration of religious texts, including the Quran, despite opposition from the previous government. Acts of such mindless desecration only serve to fuel division and hatred within our society. Will the Prime Minister commit to introducing measures to prohibit the desecration of all religious texts and the prophets of the Abrahamic religions?
And Keir Starmer responded to say that desecration is awful and he condemns it in all its forms and so on, and did not say that they wouldn't be able to bring out a law which would prohibit all such acts, which would ultimately amount to a blasphemy law if they did so. And so I did 17 minutes, almost 18-minute long videos to why I think that's problematic, because I think that would ultimately amount to a law of blasphemy, which we got rid of a long time ago. I firmly believe in the freedom of speech and expression and demonstration, which includes insulting each other, includes offending each other, and whether people are upset by that or not is not really the point. It's only if and only until it crosses a criminal threshold, which should rightly be a high threshold, that should then be prosecuted. Now, as to whether this is held to be such, again, is a matter for the courts. Again, with my broad caveat, I feel necessary to say this each time because I do get people criticize. Whenever I talk about an issue like this, I get people criticize me thinking that I'm against certain religions or I'm against Islam or whatever. I have lots of friends of lots of different faiths, lots of different backgrounds. I get on with them all. I don't condone, I don't support attacking each other and insulting each other and all these sorts of things. And I personally wouldn't burn religious books. I wouldn't agree with that, but that's not to say it's criminal, because as an advocate, I will give you both sides. You asked me, would I do that myself? No, I wouldn't. But should somebody be prosecuted for it? I don't think that should be the case either. So I'll give you both sides here. And so let me show you what's going on here. Now, first of all, we have a letter from Robert Jenrick, who is written to Chief Inspector and says, it's scarcely believable that in 2025, 17 years after Parliament abolished the crime and blasphemy, a man now stands charged for apparent offences of offending Islam. Now, the issue here is that he's been charged with a public order offence, which is aggravated. The aggravated bit comes under Section 31 of the Crime and Disorder Act, 1998, but it's the aggravated version thereof of a Section 4 offence under the Public Order Act. Now, the problem there is with the wording of that act, because if we jump very quickly to this, Section 4A is intentional harassment, alarm or distress. Now, a person is guilty of an offence if with intent to cause a person harassment, alarm or distress, and it may not necessarily be, the victim may not be the person against whom it's intended. There's case law about all that. But if he uses threatening, abusive or insulting words or behaviour or disorderly behaviour, or displays any writing, sign or other visible representation which is threatening, abusive or insulting, thereby causing that person harassment, alarm or distress. Now, talking very generally for a moment, if I may, one thing that I've always found really interesting, and I still find interesting to this day, and it motivates and informs a lot of my content here, is just how very different views can be and how entrenched and steadfast some people can be in those views. Not to say that's a criticism, but they can be very entrenched in those views. Whether they consider themselves a social justice warrior with left-leaning views, or whether they are very patriotic and traditional, and many people would call that right-wing, and recently they would say that as a derogative term, but nonetheless, that's not my place to judge. But the very different views I find very interesting, and I find it so much more interesting in the way that the news presents those headlines to you. And so for quite a while now, when I want to look at a news story and I want to see whether there are very different views being put out to the general public, which may inform their readers really as to what to think, I like to use ground news. I've used it for quite a while now, and what it does is allows you to see at a glance the different types of headlines. So if we take this one here, for example, the recent story that I've talked about with the trade deal with India, and there are very different ways of looking at it. Now, I try to give you balanced views on this channel. That's what I've aimed to do for as long as I can remember. And I don't like it when some stories or some headlines leave out bits of that. So let me give you an example here. So we've got this story here about the trade deal with India. And of course, we've got left-leaning views and we've got right-leaning views. There's a bias comparison here, so you can get a quick glance at what the differences are. And so whilst we have some fairly neutral outlets reporting down the centre, we do have some that lean left and right. So let me give you those examples. So the headline for the US version of The Independent reads, Kemi Badenoch talking rubbish over trade deal claims, according to Indian officials. New Delhi officials say Tories previously agreed to a 2-year national insurance exemption, which Kemi Badenoch now claims to be two-tier tax. Another headline reads, UK PM hits back at opposition attacks over Indian tax clause, and says he came out fighting against opposition criticism over a double taxation clause in the free trade agreement with India designed to prevent temporary workers paying social security contributions in both countries. So again, quite starkly defending this point, defending Keir Starmer, and ultimately attacking the Conservatives for being upset about it. Another headline, again, UK-India deal does not undercut British workers, says Trade Secretary. Whereas if we jump over to some of the right-leaning headlines, you can see quite a stark contrast. LBC, Farage says the India trade deal undermines British workers. Starmer says he's incoherent. Spectator says the India trade deal could be a disaster for Labour. Cauldron Paul, outrage over Labour's move to exempt Indian workers from UK taxes. GB News, Sir Keir Starmer's just sold Britain to the Indians without a shot being fired. So you can see just how different these headlines are. But of course, sometimes there will be stories that are not really covered by the left or the right, and they are disproportionate. So even here, there are fewer left-leaning views than there are right, but you can still see the difference. But for those where there is a huge gap, Ground News has a blind spot feature, and you'll see that here. This story about Prince Andrew accused of misconduct with minors, 0 out of the 9 sources covering this story lean left, which either shows you that they just didn't pick up the story or shows you that they've got their own reasons for not covering the story. And the reason this is so important is if you only read left-leaning sources, you may miss this completely. That's why it's called the blind spot. But as well as giving you an overview on the bias distribution, left or right outlets, Ground News also shows you just how accurate these sources are with a factuality score, and in this case, it's somewhat mixed. And as I've partnered with them on my channel here, I am selective about who I partner with. I get you a great discount, which is 40% off, 40% off, using my link, ground.news/BBB. It's on screen with the QR code. You can scan it with your camera, and it's in the description below. Hop over there, get yourself a great discount, 40% off unlimited access to the world's news, and then you'll know that you'll see both sides of the picture and the stories that you would otherwise miss if you only read one side or the other. So check out Ground News. I think it's fantastic. So back to the letter. Robert Jenrick is essentially saying that this guy acted with intent to cause harassment, alarm, or distress to the Religious Institute of Islam. Now, the problem there is it doesn't specify a person. Now, you might think that that's splitting hairs and so on, and these will be for legal arguments in court and so on if the charge sheet is wrong and the offence is wrong, etc. That's not for me to draw conclusions. In fact, I can't, for obvious reasons. I can't draw conclusions on that in this video. I can tell you that that is the issue that they've raised here, because if we go to the charge sheet, and you can see that charge sheet here, this has been publicised, not by me, but by Robert Jenrick here. And you can see here the offence charged under Section 31B, which is the aggravated bit, that on the 13th of February, the City of Westminster, with intent to cause against the Religious Institute of Islam harassment, alarm, or distress, displaying some writing, sign, or other visual representation which was threatening, abusive, or insulting, thereby causing that of another person harassment, alarm, or distress, and the offence was religiously aggravated within the terms of Section 28 of the Crime and Disorder Act. That essentially just defines what is racially or religiously aggravated. So coming back to the letter, again, the issue there is that it hasn't addressed a particular person. Robert Jenrick contends that this wording is legally incoherent and contrary to the express will of Parliament, that the Religious Institute of Islam is not a natural person nor a legal one. It cannot be caused harassment, alarm, or distress, much like you cannot cause harassment, alarm, or distress to a company. So you can't be charged with harassing a company because it cannot be harassed because it's not a natural person within the meaning of the Public Order Act, which underpins the aggravated offence. That the Crown Prosecution Service and Met Police have allowed a charge to proceed in this form suggests either a basic misunderstanding of the law or disturbing political impulse to insulate Islam from criticism, however offensive, from protest. Now, you can even go back to the specific words that were used in Parliament when they were talking about abolishing the common law criminal offences of blasphemy and blasphemous libel. And it says here, we would abolish the common law criminal offences of blasphemy and blasphemous libel. And then says, the government are of the view that it's now time that Parliament came to a settled conclusion on this matter for two key reasons. First, the law has fallen into disuse and therefore runs the risk of bringing new law into whole disrepute. Secondly, we've new legislation that protects individuals on the grounds of religion and belief. And then we can go to the resulting law, which is under the Criminal Justice and Immigration Act of 2008, Section 79, the abolition of common law offences of blasphemy and blasphemous libel, and thereby crystallising in specific wording that the offences of blasphemy and blasphemous libel under the common law of England and Wales are abolished. And then various sections where the blasphemous offences were also removed. So that was a specific repeal of blasphemy and blasphemous libel offences. But whilst the public order and the aggravated public order offences still stand, does that not then raise the question as to whether a charge of this nature is reigniting offences of blasphemy if there is not a specific person that's mentioned? So, as I said, this specific case will be left to the court. I can tell you about Robert Jenrick's letter about it, and I can tell you that this sort of charge does raise the question as to whether this is reigniting those offences that we took a specific decision as a country to repeal and abolish. And so now, speaking of news, and back to news on a different topic completely, but sort of linked in the way that we've taken decisions as a country to protect something, and then things start to get unravelled. Now, for this segment of the video, I'm talking about Sadiq Khan, who plans to build houses on London's Green Belt. This is reported from The Guardian. I will endeavour to remember to link it below, but you'll find it online if I don't, by searching for the title. But you'll know that London has a great green belt surrounding it, which the idea being we took the specific decision to protect green belt, not just around London, but around the country, around cities, so that we maintain this specific area of green around the country. Now, I'm reminded by my learned friend Alan Robertshaw from Art of Law, and yes, it does rhyme when we named the channel. I'll link him below as well. But I'm reminded by one of his posts just about an hour ago that authorities have removed and taken down countless thousands of trees, including ancient forests over the years. Notwithstanding the Sycamore Gap, people have now been convicted and, as I record this, are awaiting sentence. But back to this story, Sadiq Khan is announcing that he's going to build on parts of London's Greenbelt in a dramatic shift of housing policy. That's coded word for we were going to protect the Greenbelt, but now to hell with it, we're going to build houses on it. Aimed at tackling, in quotes, the most profound housing crisis in the capital's history. But then one might ask questions as to why there is a housing crisis in the first place. And that is because we have millions of people that we need to house, and many of whom, again, I hate to bring it up, but here we are, many of whom are illegal migrants to the country. And the recent estimates have jumped threefold to £15 billion over the next few years to house illegal migrants and asylum seekers. In a speech on Friday, Sadiq Khan was expected to say that the scale of change, which would need about 1 million new houses to be built across the next decade, requires a break from long-standing taboos, they say. Now, to call it a taboo to not build on green belts is a little bit insulting, really, because it's not just a taboo. It's a thing that we really should protect. We really should be protecting the green belt. Now, it's not, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it's just me that picks up the hypocrisy here, that on the one hand, they are absolutely desperate for clean air and clean air measures and the clean air zone and the charges and everything else and the atmospheric changes. And so why now, when they are looking to protect the air and the clean air zones, why are they going to build on the green belt, which is one of the few bits of green left? This goes on. It marks the first time City Hall will support the strategic release of low-quality or inaccessible greenbelt land near transport links in order to provide hundreds of thousands of new build affordable homes. The status quo is wrong, out of date and simply unsustainable, Sadiq Khan said. Development on carefully chosen parts of Greenbelt done in the right way would allow us to unlock hundreds of thousands of good quality new homes for Londoners. As mayor, I'm not willing to ignore such a prospect because it might be politically difficult, not when the life chances of the next generation of Londoners are on the line. Let me know what you think in the comments below. But I, for one, if you were to push me for my opinion, I would say that we shouldn't be building on green belts. Those are designated green belt for a reason. We should be maintaining them, and it flies in the face of maintaining clean air and air quality and so on. But I'm not a scientist. I don't have all the data and wouldn't necessarily understand all the data if I was shown it. But it seems to me that building on green belt land is not a great idea if they want to support the clean air of London. Let me know what you think in the comments, but I am exacerbated about all these little stories where they are going back on things, breaking word, breaking policies, and in this case, destroying greenbelt areas. But either way, let me know what you think. Leave me your comments below. Please do subscribe to the channel. And as always, thank you for watching.